Oh yeah, I love Baapre. People would have gone home. Huh? Ah. Oh, oh, thank you. ये वाला पंखा नहीं चल रहा? बहुत गर्मी है। No, I'm not. I take 2 minutes to just collect myself. Ah, yeah, and Sunday. Oh yeah. Everyone wanted to know what's wrong with me traipsing off to JNU on a Sunday. I said, yeah, yeah, I'm going pagal hai sir. We've begun already. Is it so already live? No. Okay. I'm very suspicious of this thing. All right. No, video is on. Oh, no, no, no. It's okay. I shouldn't make such a fuss. I mean, we are accustomed to large classrooms, unlike JNU. I have 175 students in my class at a time most of the time. So I shouldn't feel so conscious by one screen. But if it makes me very subconscious, I'll tell you. Then we'll start. No, 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 I know. So I'm the guinea pig. Good. Uh, okay. So there's no um, brief. I mean, there is a brief, but what I want to begin by saying is that see, we are working at two ends of a spectrum, which is primary healthcare, from what I understand. And I am a bit nervous because I have not actually addressed a group of primary health trained or public health focused students or researchers or colleagues before, quite like this. I work in I worked with medicine as an arena of knowledge, and which is a site in which so much intersects. And I'm trying to understand the politics of knowledge now for a very long time. And what I did was to simply pick on those approaches or methodologies that seemed to respond to my questions. I'm just giving you a little bit of my background so you know where I'm coming from and what I know and what I definitely don't know. So, what I did was because I chose an unconventional arena of study for my discipline, certainly, which is political science, um, because I didn't look at it as politics of knowledge then. I began by looking at it as politics of technology. And my point of entry for this study was actually something that happened when I was a master's student, which was the Bhopal gas tragedy. So in '84, when Bhopal happened, I was in MA final, as we used to call it those days. So it was a very powerful event for anyone who was, old enough to understand what it was. But if you were students of politics who were constantly being encouraged to look at the ground and to understand that it's your responsibility to interpret the ground on which you stand, etc., etc. So we were taught political science with that uh, with that perspective. So the year after masters, when I started to do research, for me it made sense to understand why Bhopal happened and where what happened with all the debates and what were the real debates at the heart of Bhopal and so on. And for me, what I realized in all the debates, if you go back to the archives of the debates at that time, and they are now the archive and value as it is, um, you will find that the debate goes broadly along two lines at one level, which is that the legal debate, who's culpable, whether the company was culpable or not, and who was responsible for all those lives lost and all those lives that were badly affected by the gas leak. And then there was the medical debate. What exactly happened? So primary was in terms of methyl isocyanate poisoning. Uh, so to prove methyl isocyanate poisoning meant that the company would be clearly culpable. So this, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the story, but actually the first 2 days, I forget the doctor's name sadly, but two doctors in the Hamidia hospital who actually first dealt with all the patients gave administered to the patient sodium thiosulfate, which is the antidote to cyanide poisoning. And after 2 days, they were summarily told to stop doing that because that would have proved beyond doubt that there was cyanide poisoning, and that would have taken a very different kind of turn in terms of the legal implications and therefore the kind of culpability of the company. So there was a big debate around that, and then about how the government dealt with all the gas victims and what happened subsequently. Until date, every year, I'm sure you see that on the second, 3rd of December, people will mark the date, something that people can never forget. For me, those debates were important, but linked with that was the debate as to why do we have a company like Union Carbide was then investing in India in these deadly pesticides and so on. So that led me to the entire Green Revolution debate as to why we needed the Green Revolution, etc. For you, it's all passe now because it's all been discussed so much. But for us at that time, it was still a kind of it was still fresh, and Vandana Shiva and all were just about making their arguments. And the first second report of the CSC's citizens report, the second report has just appeared at that time. There was no down to earth, and so we were really at the beginning of all these debates coming up. And so I had studied development as a master's student. Also, again, you must remember that the development debate was still new. It was not taught in economics. It was in political science, in my university at least, that the critique of development was systematically taught. And I thought to myself that the political debate around development needs to take cognizance very seriously of the kinds of technologies that 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 are adopted as part of the development paradigm. So, of course, modern science and technology is integral to the modern development paradigm. So, therefore, a critique of science, a critique of technology. So, for me, that was the trajectory. And there wasn't any ready made space where I could have actually learned all these things in India. So, we didn't have science technology studies or anything. And so it was like stumbling from one reference to the next to try and figure out exactly what it was all about. And then, but the medical question fascinated me right from the start. And it took the Bhopal questions in medicine took me to many of the other questions. And then I realized that there was this whole literature on medical knowledge in development. And so at that time, much of the work that I became familiar with was actually the work that came from medical anthropology, looking at biomedicine, a critique of biomedicine, and the alternatives to biomedicine available on available. And so for me, suddenly a whole world opened up of literature, and together with that was the public health. And then I thought, oh, but public health looks much closer to the kind of direct political concerns that I have as for my discipline. But then when I looked at public health literature, I felt that these nuanced debates on what kind of knowledge and so on, that was missing. But public health had people at the heart of the debate, and they were concerned that the best medicine must go to the people, etc. And the people was a big phrase in my generation when we began studying. And I remember that for many of us who were close to and admired the left, but did not feel entirely comfortable within the broad left spectrum for many reasons, even though we felt very, very close to them. But for us, naturally, the idea of the people was a very important one. And to me, it looked like okay, so the public health is that part of the study of medicine which is concerned about people, because the rest of the study of medicine didn't seem to be overly concerned about people in any way. So for me, that so I'm just telling you the way in which I sort of stumbled around all these literatures. And then, of course, it occurred to me that, and then, of course, it was very interesting. When I was looking for all the books, so in our anthropology department in DU, the sociology department had all this medical anthropology literature. And then I said, no, let me go to JNU and see what they have. And then here I came and found much of the public health literature. I remember sitting here in the department, in the center, looking at the library and the reading lists and so on. And of course, a lot of the literature on traditional knowledge was actually in the library here in JNU. So for me, it was like a kind of piecing together of all these things to try and make sense of the possibility that other knowledges exist for an alternative development paradigm. So these were the kind of questions I was asking myself when I came to this whole arena of medicine. And in my MPhil, towards the end, I figured that yeah, there are all these alternatives available, and that maybe I should try and explore any one alternative and see what debates there are and whether it makes sense, whether people still take it seriously, and so on. So that's how I came to the whole study of medicine. So for me, I have no medical training. I have not worked um, at the ground level in the way that public health, either activists or academics work. That's not been my side. But I have worked with understanding how traditional knowledges operate. My point of entry initially was political economy, so understanding markets and all kinds of other uh, equations within society. And then I realized that you cannot understand political economy unless and until you understand the state, you understand its relationship. Of course, that's fundamental, but also understand, uh, how policy is made, what the discourse in policy means, the text and subtext of policy, and so on and so forth, and then to see how all of that would link to the understanding of medical knowledge, um, and discovered also then that you can't look at medical knowledge unless you look at epistemology. I mean, that's a very foundational idea. So, what I've landed up doing is actually trying to have all these very diverse kinds of arenas of study uh, have conversations with each other. So I'm sort of trying to make them talk to each other to see if we can make better sense of what the politics of knowledge is about and how knowledge is constructed. I gave you this little introduction, so as I said, to give you a sense of what I know or how I know it. So I think that's very important because Mitudi asked me to talk about how um state, market, and society are to be understood in the context of thinking about primary healthcare. Yeah. So therefore, what I am going to try and do is to talk about uh, these three conceptually, and then when we talk about them conceptually, we realize that they are very closely linked to each other. So there's no way that you can actually think about or analyze one without the other. And then when we try to link them all to health, which is our primary concern, so you see the link between these three and ideas of health. And for me, the idea of health is to be located in the broader idea of development. That's very important because the development idea governs the way in which we think about everything. So I think that without contextualizing that, none of these analyses between state, market, society, health, etc., make any sense. So we will definitely talk about that. And what I will try to focus, and I mean, the minute you start speaking about these things, it becomes clear that these are very, very large conceptual spaces. They can include a lot of different variables. Um, so we would need to focus specifically on some so that we understand what exactly we want to know, why we want to know it, and what end we are going to put into. And because you're all engaged with looking at the document, Almata document, and how we can offer a different kind of Almata document for 2018 as different from 1978, uh, we need to be focused on a few aspects of this relationship between state society and the market, the economy. And so, what I have thought of doing is focusing on three things which are large enough in themselves. So, I'm not going to claim to be exhaustive in linking them, but I will just present some pointers and see where the discussion takes us. Um, Look for questions. So, I will talk about linking livelihood, knowledge, and natural resource management. Um, I will explain why. I'm just trying to give you an outline of the lecture so you know where I'm going. And then to talk about, you know, hopefully to be able to link this with the idea of primary health care, where primary health care is supposed to be at the bottom of the rung. And we need to understand how to look at the bottom of the rung. The bottom of the rung can be at the bottom of a pyramid. So it's last as far as one view can go. But for many of us, it needs things need to begin from the bottom, and you need to work your way further up. If that is it to be the case, and that's certainly my worldview, then we will need to look at the autonomy of the body. That space, does it have an autonomy? And does it can it exercise some kind of autonomy with respect to livelihood, with respect to knowledge, with respect to national resources? So these three will serve as a peg to understand the nature of that space, that bottom space. And that will enable us to see the possibility of that bottom being autonomous or having some kind of a political leverage far more than it has had so far. And for me, that is a matter of politics, not a matter of technique. It's not a matter of uh, institutional arrangement alone. It is about a political mobilization. It's about a political perspective. So this is basically what I'm going to talk about. Um, what I've decided to do is not at all refer to the document. Okay. I'm not going to refer to the document uh, because I see my input as something that should help you structure what you want to do as a response to the document. So my reading of the document doesn't need to feature in this at all. So I thought best not to talk about that. I will talk about my understanding of state, economy, and society and its linkages with respect to health, focusing livelihood management and national resource management knowledge, and let's see where. Is that sort of okay? Makes sense? Okay. So I thought I should have some sense of where everybody's coming from. Shall we do a quick round of introduction? That should be okay. So can we start from here? Findings. These are findings. Meanwhile, my criticism was public administration. What's the PhD on? Transmission of distribution hospitals in the 1970s. Hospitals. My name is Sushmita, and I'm a PhD researcher. I am degree assistant. My thesis is on public-private partnership in Canada. So, that's how I'm interested in the topic. I'm trying to understand how I can fit my findings to a more theoretical, give it a theoretical understanding,
if you're more on the evaluation is not the agenda. It's to go and understand what is the process and how the actors perform.
What did you do your interview? Subjective understanding of the body. Arson. Okay. What World Bank's health, aid in health system. Okay. Any particular programs or you? Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Mm. Yeah. Mm. Oh, good. That work needs to be done. Right. Good. Medical debts. Okay. Hmm. Ah, yes. Right. Mohit. So, so, good. Thank you for that. That's useful. Okay. Actually, uh, I'm just, you know, I'm going to talk about the, sort of conceptual understanding of the state and so on, which, I mean, I'm a little bit unsure as to how uh, basic it should be or how, sort of detailed it should be. But let me go ahead, and if you feel that this is ground that really doesn't need to be covered, then if you can just indicate that, huh? Then you. modern state, um, we need to understand it most importantly historically. It's the kind of modern state that we all live in uh, is very clearly a product of certain kinds of historical development. And many of those historical developments were not even located in India. And yet we have actually adopted many of the features and structures of the modern nation state. So there are actually at least two broad aspects that we need to remember about it. One is that there is a historical context to the modern nation state as it evolved in Europe. And then there is the historical context of that idea, the modern nation state idea that comes to us through the colonial state. And then the anti colonial movement, and then the post colonial assertion of the modern nation state is actually a product of a negotiation with that modern nation state idea. That what we inherited from the colonial state here is something we are still negotiating. It's not something that we have adopted whole scale, uh, and we have and so it's best to understand it as a process and not a product. You know, so let me just look at the two aspects. One, if we look at the modern nation state in Europe, the modern nation state in Europe emerges out of the decline of feudalism. Feudalism, all of us, at least the broad structures of feudalism, we are all familiar. So then there are these, there's the monarchy, and then there is aristocracy, which controls land. The central organizing principle is around land, and that there's a vast majority of the population which works on the land through a number of different occupations. So agriculture, farming is one, and then there are all the allied occupations which produce different products, and all of them are linked to the land. And there's a certain structure of production around which a whole community of life is created. And that feudal structure, when it breaks down for a number of reasons. It breaks down, one, for a very foundational economic reason uh, that people begin to travel, they begin to explore new lands, and that gives them an exposure to all kinds of other systems of production, markets, and so on and so forth. A very, very foundational reason why that changes is because of what we know as enlightenment. So then there is rationality and application of rationality to every single aspect of human existence, whether it is the understanding of nature to the understanding of society. So to question everything, to understand how nature is made up, how do you explain every single component of nature? That's one aspect out of which all the sciences emerge. And then there is the understanding of society. So, why should society be hierarchized in this particular way? Why should the responsibilities be distributed in this way? Why should there be power like this? Why should just a few have power? Why not the rest, etc.? So, out of which we have a completely different understanding of society and the creation of society. So, both of these, sort of realms of thought and action produce disciplines. So you have the natural sciences and the social sciences, but you also have new kinds of products. So out of the natural sciences, you have a whole lot of scientific instruments and tools and so on, which then have further implications for the way in which people do things. And then in the social sciences, you have the creation of institutions, you have the creation of uh, organizations. So the creation of representative institutions, the fact that the king cannot be is not seen as a manifestation of the divine, that the people have rights, that people have duties, and therefore, together with that, the idea that the individual is more important than the community. These are all ideas that come out of a very systematic transformation of society. There's nothing given about this. That's what is interesting about looking at these things historically. You realize that people did think differently to what people assume today is the truth. So when people say, people are innately selfish and everybody wants to work on their self interest, and economic self interest is the most important. The minute we ever encounter any such ideas, we need to start asking, so since when was this an idea? And then you find that it's not some ancient idea at all. It's actually an idea that's 350, 400 years old, not older. And it is systematically constructed through a very complex process of positioning something that is more important than others for community. So creation of a certain kind of economic profit, economic output, and then the drive towards that to be the basal instinct of human beings. So these things are very carefully, and this is not some kind of conspiracy. It is a change in thought, which actually builds one with the other, links one with the other, and so when a transformation takes place in society, that transformation actually is about understanding foundationally the human being in a different way, all the way up to the community to the nation. So the nation state is a modern construct which comes out of the modern idea of the individual, the modern idea of a completely different notion of community, the modern idea of representation, of rights, of duties, of responsibilities, of citizenship, um, and power. Most important, most importantly, power. So, where does power lie in society, and where does it should it ought it to lie? So, both the normative as well as the substantive questions are very, very important aspects, which are a construct of modernity. And the idea that the human being should be is individual is important, individual self-interest is important. But together with that goes individual freedom is important, equality is important. One of the most beautiful aspects of the idea of individual becoming primary is that it becomes necessary to equate one individual with the other. Then you have to see that equality has to be the baseline. One of the most interesting discoveries of science that helps us to reiterate, despite all prejudice, that we are all equal, is when science is able to show that actually all human beings have the same anatomy. And I always find that that's a very important foundation of the idea of equality. So we have, therefore, uh, if modern ideas emerge, which we know as liberalism, then liberalism is basically about a liberal understanding of human beings who are free and who engage with each other through a process of negotiation, through a process of creation of institutions in which each person's self interest is represented and negotiated with if we are to come up with anything that benefits everyone. So, the modern idea of politics, which binds human beings, is the idea of the individual going up to the nation state. But the nation state is a repository of the negotiation between individuals on principles, on representation, on laws, rules which govern them. So, which Weber calls the rational legal approach. That what you think is rational is then negotiated to become legal. And then that legality is the foundation of the nation. That is a very, sort of foundational idea of liberalism, which is the foundation of the modern nation. And then you have uh, so in this, the foundations of the modern nation state are also where the foundations of modern political economy lie. That where you understand that the creation of the modern nation state is linked to a very significant extent the creation of the modern economy. And what is this modern economy? Modern economy is one that is developed as a result of the transformation from feudalism towards capitalism. It takes 400 years, we must remember that. And that is aided by all these so-called discovery trips. Yeah, people go out to discover. So people from Europe actually go out to discover. You must remember that the rest of the world was traveling a lot before that. The Europeans make such a big deal about their travels that we sort of have been made to forget that from Beijing to Samarkand, people were traveling back and forth for 2,000 years. Ah, so there was a lot of traveling, and of course now there is evidence that from the, let's say, Samoan Islands to Papua New Guinea and all these places, across from New Zealand and everywhere, people were traveling on catamaran. You know what a catamaran is? Anyone here? No? A catamaran is just a single log of wood which is made into a dugout of a boat, and with one sail, sometimes no sail. And that goes from Hawaii to New Zealand. Two people on a catamaran across the Pacific Ocean. How do they do it? Understanding wind velocity. That's it. And very fast because if you go at the right time when the wind is right and you have calculated, you know which season the wind blows which way. And then you just put your sail to the wind as it were. Yeah. And then the wind carries you. So people were traveling a lot before that, right? And so there was a lot of exchange between different civilizations. And my favorite, and you must forgive these little forays here and there because they actually help us to understand modernity much better. You notice my favorite example of how people must have traveled and how keenly they would have traveled is how many of you here know what batik is? Batik, so one Bengali knows what batik is. So batik is actually a, a, a mode of printing. No, this is Kalamkari. This is Kalamkari. Batik is a form of printing which is done by wax and colors. It's an amazingly beautiful, for, you know, form of printing, which you will find just now. If you imagine the map of the world, okay, and you start from Indonesia, the most beautiful batik come from Indonesia. Okay, so you will find batik in Indonesia, you'll find batik in Burma, you'll find batik in Thailand, Malaysia, you'll find batik in Sri Lanka, you'll find batik in Bengal, okay, and then from Sri Lanka you go west, you get batik in Eastern Africa, batik in Western Africa, and you find batik in Mexico. So can you imagine how batik travels? According to what we call now the global south. There's batik across the global south for as long as anyone can remember. So people were traveling a lot before the Europeans suddenly realized that you can. And I'll come back to this traveling of the pre-modern to when it is relevant. So what we find is that the Europeans, when they start traveling, they start traveling with new instruments. So the compass is an Enlightenment instrument, um, that form of the compass, and of course, uh, shipbuilding of a different kind. Um, so if you were to follow Dharampal's work, for instance, you find that shipbuilding in India was a very advanced technology up until the 17th century in India. Shipbuilding in other parts of the world also were very, very advanced. But the Europeans started building ships around the 16th century, 15th, 16th century, and started for long distance travel. And that, is when they come and discover that there's a thriving world, you know. And they had some idea, of course, about that world of so India being the land of riches, etc., because of that older trade route. So the Silk Route, which everybody has heard about, I'm sure, which came all the way up to Central Asia. And then from Central Asia, the traders would go into Europe. So that Silk Route actually had brought the memory of a very advanced economy of Peninsula India and China to Europe. So when Europe goes out to travel, they travel to discover these markets. The reason I'm telling you this little detail is because we need to understand, and I find very often that our understanding of colonialism and relationship with the Europeans begins with the time when they came to buy our raw materials for their industries. But we need to remember that our relationship with them goes before that. They first came to buy our finished products. They bought those finished products here and they sold them at a higher price in Europe, and that is the origin of mercantile capital. We must remember that. Why is that important? It's important because the Europeans knew that there was this thriving set of products which they had to aspire to. The Europeans were aspiring to what was already here. And so when European feudalism is breaking down and modern industrialization is taking place, a new economy is being built that seeks to approximate the prosperity that they have seen elsewhere. And for us today, it may seem a little bit hard to reconcile, but that is how it was. The prosperity was here, and they were trying to aspire to that prosperity through an industrial revolution. So everything that they did, the creation of synthetics, the creation of machinery, everything was to approximate the kind of the prosperity they had seen here. So the modern nation state, which develops on the basis of this expanding economy, is where these new ideas are being tried out. Which are these new ideas? Already we've talked about the individual and self interest and working towards profit. But then it becomes more consolidated through the development of mercantile capitalism, and mercantile capitalism consolidating in Europe together with discoveries of technology and so on to lay the foundation of industrialization. So mercantile capitalism, then industrial capitalism, which is through the 17th and 18th century, and then you have uh, the industrial capitalism once it actually establishes itself well, and it becomes able to produce uh, a fair amount of those products on its own, whatever products they were, whether it was textiles or whether it was new machinery or alternative forms of construction or whatever, ships. Once they began to have an autonomous scope, then they began to look for raw materials and for markets elsewhere. And by then, what they had done was through the mercantile period when they were buying from us and selling in Europe, they had understood that the buying would become much easier if they changed their power relations in India. Mhm. So the change in the power relations with India necessarily meant that they then began to look to control the prices rather than simply do the trading. Why did they opt to actually defeat all the rulers and take control over themselves? It was precisely so that they could control the economy, for them to be able to control the prices at which they bought things and eventually the prices at which they were able to buy the raw materials. So that transformation is a very important one, and that is what enables them to build their industries at the pace that they did. Again, very important. That's why we need to understand the history. That the entire development of industry in Europe piggybacks on colonialism. If they did not have this kind of supply of cheap and readily available raw materials, they would have never had the kind of rapid industrialization they did. So that that Europe industrialized at such a fast pace is not a product of their brilliance or their hard work or their love for labor or dignity of labor and so on and so forth. All the things that we like to ascribe to them. Some of it certainly must be there. Why should one deny? But a lot of it is due to what colonialism made possible. So the liberal idea of the modern nation state, to just go back and tie up all the loose ends, is about creating a liberal, democratic political system, a political structure in society, which is solidly founded on this kind of economy that is being built uh, through colonialism, through imperialism, and through industrialism. Okay, so this, so to understand liberalism, under, to understand industrialization and the way it happened in Europe is very important because it's not an autonomous process. I'll take questions here in case you want. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. That is a foundational idea of the modern nations. But when we look at the transformation from feudalism to capitalism, don't just see it as an economic transformation. A very important transformation is the transformation of power structures. So the fact that in feudalism the power is between the monarchy and the aristocracy. When other classes begin to emerge from society, those classes come out of the mercantile class. Those who left this the tight control of the feudal aristocracy went out to do trade, came back with capital. Then they started to assert their power as well. To say that we are contributing to the economy as much as you are. So why should we be cowed down by you? And we should have as much say in the running of the government as you should. So the economy and the economic and the political are very closely aligned. That's something that we need to understand. And therefore, they are the ones who begin to say that we must have rights as well. We must have, they, I mean, this new mercantile class that comes back with all this profit. They are the ones who say to the king, to the feudal aristocracy, that you are not the sole creators of wealth in the society. Earlier, when the feudal aristocracy controlled the land, all the wealth was created from the land. But now, when the wealth is being created by overseas trade and by different kinds of economies, then those running that economy began to claim that because they are contributing to the wealth of the society, they must also have a say in the running of the society. So, the first liberal idea of expanding the power beyond the feudal aristocracy comes from the mercantile bourgeoisie. And the peasants who are a carryover from the older feudal system, and the new workers who are a creation as a result of the enclosures movement and the creation of the industrialization and so on, those workers are evolving as a category of people who are beginning to understand that, oh, we have a different kind of role. And they are still exploited, but the structure of that exploitation has changed. So their coming into the idea of democracy, of liberal democracy, happens far more slowly. So, therefore, the transformation is both at the economic as well as the political level, which gives rise to the birth of the nation state. Have I confused you more? That's what I want you to see, that both things are happening simultaneously. It's best not to go to a kind of causal relationship between because the economy happens, therefore politics happens. It doesn't always ever happen like that. Of course, sometimes it does, but analytically, it's richer if you look at it as a continuous process of affecting each other. That's all I'm saying. Okay? Yeah.
You're talking about that initially when the West was appropriating their development in terms of what existed in the other parts of the globe. You said they were approximate. I mean, they were their industrialization, or they went ahead with these things because they wanted to uh, get a kind of prosperity which existed in other places, which they thought they also want to have with them. So therefore, there was a, if I'm wrong, just correct me, there was some sort of power that the the other part, or the other sections or the other countries had vis-a-vis the Europe. And
No, they didn't have any power because they didn't have any relationship with them. The Europeans came here as traders, and trade was not new to any of these parts of the world. As I was just saying, there were trade routes all over. The people traded by sea, the people traded by land.
but they would have their own set of powers. So
Yeah, yeah.
how did we, how did the choice of Europeans to become more powerful by controlling not get any contestation from the existing power of which
Huh.
exists?
That, you see, is the history that we've all studied, which is that the existing power structure in, let's say, Peninsular India, because that's what we are most familiar with. So there, when there is trade from Europe, let's say in the early Mughal period, so in Jahangir's time, also, we all know the stories that this Portuguese big merchant was parked in near Goa for a long time, and for 2 years or something, Jahangir did not allow him to come to the court. Didn't give him permission. कि हम तो नहीं मिलते थे ऐसे सब क्या है आप who are you. So in that sense, there was a power, and they decided the terms of trade because this was a powerful land. Otherwise, but then over time, given the kind of changes that anywhere you have had
Smaller
power relations
provinces or something like that.
and no, well, the breakdown of the big Mughal Empire and the creation of other, the assertion of other provinces, you could say, and the fact that these traders who were coming in were able to take advantage of whatever dissonance or disturbance there was in the breakdown of this. Which, everywhere in the world, that is how things have changed. And so there was nothing, extraordinary about it. If you look at the history of the world and the way things change, so wherever someone comes in from outside, if there is a fine power structure within, settled power structure, then they are able to withstand. But also, takeover by an external power was not seen as the way we see it now, that विदेशी थे वो आके हमारे ऊपर राज किए. Because if you see, I mean, there's conquest and this thing all over the world, so there was no notion of a pristine land and someone that could not come and stay here, etc. So that, yes, that breakdown of that power is what enabled them, and they contributed to the breakdown of that power because they were able to use their economic leverage vis-a-vis that. So that certainly contributed to the way in which the Europeans were able to consolidate their position in India or in any other part of the world for that matter. So, the liberal state, so I was just trying to explain that the liberal state is all of these things. So, the liberal state is the liberal democratic state, which has, um, you know, rights to the individual, powers to the individual, and so on and so forth, representation, choice, elections, etc., etc. But that democratic state rests on this history. Uh, the critique of the liberal democratic state, most powerful critique in the 19th century, comes from the Marxist critique. And the Marxist critique is at several levels. It's at the level of politics, it's at the level of the economy, primarily, and with the significant implications for the level of the society. And the Marxist critique is saying that basically the structure of production, the way it develops in Europe through the Industrial Revolution, that structure of production in terms of its ownership of the means of production and the people who work on that system is very, very uneven, unequal, and there is no uh, veracity in the logic of capitalism. That the profit that is being generated actually is generated unfairly, and that a large part of that profit actually belongs to wage labor, and so on. So everybody's familiar with that argument. I don't need to, look at that more in detail. detailed but a very, very powerful argument which actually questions the foundations of capitalism. But it questions the foundations of capitalism in terms of the ownership of means of production and the fact that changing the ownership will also transform the relations of production. So if people are collectively feel that they can own production, then the relations between them will not be hierarchical, but they will be much more equal and so on, horizontally distributed, and that will make for a truly democratic system. So in that sense, he clearly establishes the relationship between the political and the economic. So if the economic is more fairly distributed in terms of ownership, then the power will also be distributed fairly. That's the whole argument of Marx. And that's the grounds on which revolution is sought to be conducted. And so it's very clear that the socialist revolution would be a transformation of both the economic and the political. But then, as later critique shows, that um, uh, the questioning of the structure of production by Marxism did not involve, not only did not involve, but actually included a kind of uh, celebration of the technological basis of capitalism. So Marx is clearly a great admirer of the scientific revolution of technology, and he says that this is the most productive stage of human civilization. That we have been able to create all this technology, this machinery, which is actually able to use natural resources and so on. So this rational, transformation of the human being has made the human being much more productive. And that is one aspect which comes in for critical analysis afterward, because we clearly see that this great transformation of production systems, which are based on a continuous exploitation of nature, are actually uh, not a very long run viable kind of a set of technologies, that they have deep inherent problems, and that this problem is a problem not just of bad technology, but it's actually a perspective which is harmful in the long run. And therefore, that the perspective of seeing nature as resource rather than nature as part and parcel of the same system of which the human being is a part, and therefore that nature and human being can be in harmony without the human being being overawed by nature, and to be able to be responsible for nature while using nature as well. So European Enlightenment, uh, they say, while being responsible as well. Oh. So you extract, but you're also responsible for its sustenance over a long period of time. Because that is something and in that sense, Marxism was a clearly Enlightenment philosophy. And at its heart, in terms of understanding how nature is to be related to by human beings, is a very clearly rationalist, post Enlightenment kind of understanding. And that is something that comes in for critique afterward in the 20th century. But we'll come back to that critique in a bit. Uh, what happens as a result of Marxism is a kind of declared revolution in many parts of the world, beginning with the Soviet Union. But we find that that revolution is about transforming the capitalist structures of in a certain way, no question, and certainly making many of the benefits of capitalism available to much larger number of people than that was the case in Europe through its achievement of capitalism. But it was not about being able to completely flatten the structures. It was not about creating alternative realms of political action, really. Because if it is to be a higher level of democracy, as Marx claimed, then that higher level of democracy would necessarily have involved the uh, the political structures being non-hierarchical, being able to provide certain exercise of rights that were genuinely, sort of democratic, and so on. Um, we do find that while many of the benefits of inverting or flattening out the hierarchies of capitalism were available in the socialist world, many parts of the socialist world. But in essence, that democratic transformation does not take place. And at one point, it tips the other way. It actually tips the totalitarian way because of the unequal power relations that are generated through the practice of post-revolutionary. So that is one way, that is one product of the modern nation state. So capitalist state, which is then challenged by socialist revolution, and then you have the creation of a socialist state, which has a certain kind of character. On the other hand, the capitalist state that continues, from the 18th to the 19th to the 20th century, slowly is a state which actually, as I said to you, remember that the mercantile bourgeoisie, which slowly first tapped at the corridors of power and said, look, we want power as well. So you have the creation of the parliament. And interestingly, the early parliament and the early creation of the House of Commons was as a result of the commons who were not aristocracy. The commons, not as the common people, as you and I like to, but the commons were those who were not aristocrats. So the House of Commons belonged really to the new rich, yeah, the new mercantile bourgeoisie and so on that were coming. But over the 18th, 19th century, that very notion expanded to include more and more people. So it became a definitely democratizing process. But we know that the women came in even last, much later. Uh, and that capitalist democracy, as some people would like to call it, capitalist democracy that evolved into the 20th century. In the very early part of the 20th century, capitalism suffers a huge collapse, right? So 29 Great Depression, there's a huge collapse. And then people realize that the Marxist critique to a great extent is valid because in the long run, capitalism cannot sustain with the kind of market failures it periodically experiences. And so once if the market crashes, then you really had it and to pick yourself up and go again is very difficult. And who then picks it up and goes? It's the state. So in that sense, the economy and the political changes keep on happening together at the same time. So when in 29 the economy collapses, the state comes in to prop it up. And they, before they have sort of begun to establish themselves and got a hold on themselves, one of the most important outcomes of that depression was the creation of the right-wing ideology of Nazism and extreme nationalism that comes out of economic depravity and economic nationalism, extreme economic nationalism that comes at the on the heels of people losing their faith in capitalist democracy, saying this really doesn't work like this. Maybe we need an alternative, and the alternative is that right wing discourse which says that it's it must be exclusive, it should be for a few people, and just wait. We create an economy that comes out of a certain frame, then that economy will be more sustainable. And then, of course, the World War crashes much of these economies all over because it's such an expensive affair to conduct a war. But the lesson that emerges out of the war is that the economy cannot or has not proved itself to be as autonomous as they had thought. And that after the Second World War, that they need to run an economy by the state, driven by the state. And that is where you have the the pause, the transformation in the thinking on the liberal state, and the liberal state then becomes the welfare state, right? Judy, should we pause for 5 minutes? I think people, it's getting a bit much for people. Or what? You okay? Actually. All right. So, oh, no. No, I think some people do need tea. It looks like. Hmm? You have one question, please. Yeah. Uh, See, the thing is that I would be hesitant to call it just a market, because when you say market, you assume that it is a, you have a certain idea of the market in mind. Huh. The economy is better, and the economy is a very powerful impetus for the way in which the politics move. But I would not go with marking the economy as the impetus, because we do know that so much in the economy actually changes because of changes in the state. So at different points in time, one or the other provides the impetus for change. And that we must be prepared to try and see that at which stage, which is the one that's providing. The economy is big, no question about it. Huh. See, technology is a product. It's not a process. And when state is sort of saving capitalism, that is a process of institution building, recovery, laws, regulations. So technology cannot possibly be a player in that really. Technology also will have to be used in particular ways. That's one way of looking at technology. But what technology you produce and who produces the technology doesn't have an autonomous life. Technology also, at any point in time, it is somebody is producing it, and with some intent, with some outcome in mind. So there is no autonomous role of technology that I can see. Unless you have something specific in mind, then we can address that. Huh, but then, first of all, you must not think that after 29, the crisis was in 2007. Huh. There were many crises, and so you must see in every crisis how there was the recovery. So in 2007, maybe, but in 2007, it was basically the handling of the banking sector and how, nation states acted, primarily the US, the way in which it saved the banking sector from all the really bad decisions they had made before that, which were not for any other reason except that they were big banks. No other reason. So it is a play of power to save a certain kind of economy. because a whole lot of other power is affiliated to that economy. There is no real, I mean, there's no self-serving logic in that. That's the point I want. Okay. Okay. Huh. Yeah, let me get this one. No, no. Tell me the question again. The political culture. Through political culture. Well, uh, political culture is deeply linked to the idea of uh, political economy, the way it functions, and so on. But why are you asking this question? Let me ask you in return. Why are you asking this question? Absolutely. Um, actually, uh, if you start looking at the way in which, even today, you look at the relationship between the way in which certain kinds of markets function with entities that are culturally rooted in these societies, but economically they're still negotiating. And that would be very interesting understanding. So that's why I said at the very beginning that we're still negotiating many things. So we should not assume that. So I'll give you the example of the Bakarwal community. The Bakarwal community is very much a part of the cultural, ecological, economic landscape of Himalayan India. Not just Kashmir, but in Himachal, everywhere. Yeah? And they have been pastoralists for as long as we can remember. And they are a very important part of the political economy. But the modern nation state has no idea how to deal with pastoralists in pretty much the same way that they don't know how to deal with Adivasis. And the reason for that is precisely because the Adivasi, the pastoralist, live in a different notion of political economy, different notions of exchange, different notion of what is considered to be the good life as opposed to what is considered to be poverty. So foundationally, there's a difference between the way in which they perceive their lives and societies and power, and the way in which they in the nation state and those of us who live in this. So you see the Bakarwals when they cross the highways with their big herds. No, you just see them as a nuisance. You don't know that they are very much part and parcel of the ecology of that land. Yeah. So there, as far as I can see, it's still a struggle between the different entities of the economy and their notions of political economy and political society. But that's what I can say as far now. I don't know if that sort of even addresses your question. Yeah. So you can come back to it. You know, if in any other point, at any other point, it seems to relate to what I'm saying, please alert me and then we can discuss. Yeah.
Something that I'm grappling with is also I'm trying to look for an answer.
Yeah.
Is that when we talk about state, society, economy, they are none of them are monoliths. that this idea that the liberal state, therefore, and through these processes became a welfare state. Uh, Media Gopal Jar type argument that it was never a welfare state as far as India is concerned. So there is that kind of an argument. And also the fact is from my own field work, I see that there is different notions of power across different levels of state officials. So what I mean, I'm sure, like since you're nodding, I
Yeah.
think I've put my
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so when you look at when you kind of amalgamate them and think of okay, so this became more powerful and the state therefore became I think what I also kind of find a resonance to what he was asking is that the state therefore is powerful vis-a-vis some and not so powerful vis-a-vis somebody. And so and who are these? This is entirely. I don't know whether we'll come to it later, so you can answer it then. Is whom the state chooses to exert power on depends on exactly what and why, and is it only a matter of the state not having the power vis-a-vis that person, or that person has certain other forms of power which the state is not able to negotiate with and hence gives up? I'm just using layman language.
No, no. See, the thing is that the difficulty with this kind of a sweep of an argument that I'm trying to make is that all the nuances and details are completely lost. I'm very aware of that. The reason why I'm still doing it is because I feel that at a very foundational level, many of the many of the assumptions, many of the beliefs that we start with when we are working with the model, we forget that there is such a long and complex history, and much of that history is never factored into our discussion about the state. Number one. So that's why it needs to be done, a broad sweep of history. Second, we haven't yet come to the welfare state in post-colonial India. So I completely, of course, would look at the welfare state in India in a very, very different light. How the power structure that is the heart of the welfare state in India is uh, is just so uneven and so evocative of the already existing hierarchies in society. So, in a sense, the welfare state actually replicates those hierarchies. Yeah, and so all of us who have to negotiate with that welfare state have to be cognizant of those uh, prevalent hierarchies and to see whether you can negotiate past them if you want anything from the state. So I'm very aware of that. Uh, and I am trying to give this kind of conceptual understanding so that the possibility that across history, even the big end of the modern nation state be understood in some historical context rather than as some kind of a received entity which we have to take as a given and we cannot negotiate. So that's the only sort of thought. And the welfare state that is sought to be created in the post-colonial period in India is a welfare state in one way, the developmentalist state in another way. Very clearly, it has an agenda of development, which it would like to promote in in the actions of the state, where it is very clear that those who are going to be supposedly the recipients of development or the engineers of development are not participating in the decisions on development, whether that is what they would like or not, whether they would like to look at alternatives or not. None of this is actually taken into account. But um, just to leave that for the minute, we go back to the larger story that the big collapse of the market happens in 71, the 73, sorry, with the oil price crashing and the creation of the uh, of the OPEC and that cartel, which was then going to influence the politics across the world. Because with the rise in oil prices, the everything in Europe and in the United States began to be much more expensive. So that shows most of all in the expense of the state, and therefore already existing critiques of the state, like the bureaucracy doesn't need to do this and it takes on too much, etc. That uh, that is something that we need to uh, sort of see as a very important transition in the character of the nation. Um, so it's in 73 that the cracks in the liberal idea of the state, which has by now translated itself into the Western welfare state. And I'm talking about all this happening in the West. So this welfare state is something that begins to show up the cracks of, because just the amount of funding that is required to run the modern nation, that funding is actually being lost, and therefore there is this desire to create a different kind of state, which will not, be so expansively responsible for running the economy, which was the case after the Second World War. That now we will not expect the state to run the economy, but we will expect the economy to run by itself, and the state will periodically provide its support as and when necessary. Right? So this marks a very important change in the perspective on the state um, in 1973. And you have a whole lot of other conferences coming up in order to understand the significance of what the significance of what the welfare state can do or what it cannot do. And this is what calls for the creation of the neoliberal state, as we call it. As neoliberal because the primacy of the state remains, but uh, the the sort of interventions that would be taken up by the market, the to run the structures at that time of the state, those would be uh, slowly handed over to players other than that. So, I have a difficulty with the whole discourse around the neoliberal state. That there is a glib kind of globalization, liberalization, privatization kind of argument, which I think is a very rough and ready kind of argument. It needs to be far more nuanced, needs to be more systematic if we are to understand uh, the character of the neoliberal. Now, the neoliberal state, therefore, which emerges in the 70s in the United States and in the rest of Europe, also then begins to um affect a large number of countries in Europe. And that is then acquires a different kind of status, a different kind of role in terms of the political economy and uh, in terms of the, you know, in terms of the contribution that the state is supposed to make to what's going on. It's important though that at this time uh, the 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 change in the neoliberal orientation is something that affects countries in Europe to a great extent. But then, because Europe does the transformation, therefore, it believes that that is the benchmark for how the state should be at this time. This is something that they've been playing with since the Second World War. So, because Europe has had a certain kind of development, so the rest of the world must have that development. Because Europe has two camps, So the whole world should be divided into camps. Politically. Now, because the European mindset has changed, European American mindset has changed in terms of how liberalism should operate. Liberalism should not be so liberal as to give so much space to citizens, etc. So now everybody has to transform because this is the outcome of the colonial hangover and into the post-colonial state. So the fact that the Bretton Woods system is created, the interconnections between all the economies is retained without the cumbersome responsibility of colonials. So Bretton Woods is the expression of imperialism, imperial control internationally across the globe. So the thing is, you see, even when the mainstream economists don't use things like imperial control and so on, they are very clear that the control is there. They are very clear that they are the ones who have to guide the way international trade is going to happen. Huh? And they are the ones who have the understanding of how modern markets function, right? What is deeply interesting and problematic at the same time is that they equate concepts that are 200, 300 years old to the foundational concept itself. And then what they do is to preclude the possibility of any other ways of describing any of these new concepts. Think of all the concepts that are associated with development, democracy, uh, market, society, individual, community. All of these are concepts that are defined in one particular way. All of us go with the assumption that, for instance, the interest of the individual is always at odds with the interest of the community. But if you see the relationship between the Bakarwal and the sedentary agricultural community, there's no question of individual interest being at odds. It is complementary. It has problems. No one is saying that there are no hierarchies, there are no problems. There are problems. But then the foundational idea is of complementarity. And it's an ecological, economic complement. So, what we need to be very careful. So, when we are looking at ideas for society, and this sort of links me to what you are trying to do. When you are linking with ideas, when you are thinking about ideas for society, then one of the things that we should begin to do now is to think about our society as if it is our society, the way it is, with all its faults and with all its characteristics. Of course, that some things we want to change, no question, but therefore that we think of health for ourselves the way we think of ourselves. We think of market for ourselves the way we think about exchange. If now simply to go with a very stark example, all of us have a nice cold thing to drink. Most of us don't know where the hell it has come from. One person has gone and bought it, and whatever, and or the senior most person will take eventual responsibility. So, but if four of us went out for tea after this and went looking for some dhaba that would give us a cup of tea, which I think many of us might be quite welcome. But when we do that, huh, is each of us going to pay for our tea? Unlikely. We will find out some way in which ठीक है आप मैंने दे दिया कोई बात नहीं अगली बार आप आएंगे तब आप दे दीजिएगा. This is something that comes, if I may say, at the risk of being essentialist, that it comes naturally. है ना? So most of the time this is what we would do, and if somebody does not do that or somebody does not pay for other people, then we all laugh at them. Yeah, ये कभी नहीं पिलाता अच्छा, you know, and we laugh at them, and it's a joke to the point when one day somebody will catch hold of that person and say आज तो तू पिला के छोड़ेगा तो इसको छोड़ेंगे नहीं जब तक तू पिलाएगा नहीं. So there is a sense of the individual and the community very different, which two things: a, we are different, and two, why do we need to reconsider it? I'm very happy the way we are. I do not want to be. I mean, the first time I went to study abroad, and वो चाय पीने गए तो सब लोग अपना 40p निकाल के अपने चाय पी रहे थे. what are you doing? Can't one person pay for everybody's tea and then next time, please, the next time, the next same four people may not drink the tea. Oh, exactly. This is exactly how I laughed. I said, oh my God, how small minded are you guys? तो चाय ही तो पी रहे हैं यार उसमें क्या बड़ी बात है and they are the ones for the first time I discovered. I mean, I had been a student of economics. I had studied what is the thing um, in when you produce in bulk, what is the word, scale, returns to scale. I But for the first time I went and saw, now you people, you won't understand what it means. I feel like you're my grandmother. But for the first time, that in a packet you can get 100 tea bags at once. 100 का टी बैग 200 का टी बैग मतलब what is this? It returns to scale. So everything is in some fantastic scale, which is, and then there's supermarkets, hypermarkets. Why is everything being sold at one place in so much amount? All of it is returns to scale. ऐसे एक तरफ तो इकोनॉमी को तो आपने स्केल का यहाँ तक पहुंचा दिया और मन को उतना ही छोटा, मतलब ये कैसे हो सकता है? There's a problem. But the difficulty is that if you there's a way in which rationalization of certain kinds uh, makes it possible to position individuals and interests and economic decisions and activities in particular ways, which make the rest of everything seem completely irrelevant and nonsense. And I'm saying that our understanding of the way in which their ideas have evolved helps us to see the cracks and to say that, look, we do not have to take this as the gospel. There is, it is their sociological construct perhaps. And our sociological construct has its own advantages and disadvantages. Let me deal with it mine. And this is what this foundational approach has enabled the studies of democracy in particular, study of rights in particular, and no given notion. And I can tell you as a political scientist, so a lot of people will say to me, we are a very imperfect democracy. We have so many political parties. दो political party, फिर ऐसे representation होगा, एक prime minister बनेगा, एक opposition बनेगा. Don't you think that's terribly mechanical? And it means कि कोई तीसरा पार्टी बनना चाहता है तो उसको तो गला दबा के बंद कर देंगे, और जो होता ही है हर बार प्रेसिडेंशियल इलेक्शन में एक ना कोई एक होगा, ऑड बॉल. He will try to run, and everyone will laugh at him, and he will disappear after the second or third one. That is managing dissent in a very sophisticated way, which does not demonstrate uh, the unfairness of it all. So, what I'm saying is that understanding this whole um, um, the historical evolution and the sociological nuances of these concepts enables us to have a lot more confidence in the differences. And that is why we need to understand these things very, very systematically. Um, um, okay, we may need to stop. But uh, actually, what I've landed up doing is discussing state and economy very much in tandem. Um, and to see how, of course, in all of this, we've talked about rationality, rights, and so on. Um, I just want one thing that I want to say about the market, since you mentioned the market. The word market comes to us quite naturally these days, when we might actually mean the economy. Or if we mean the market, we mean the market in a very narrow sense, which has been defined in the last 150 years or so. There is no one notion of the market. Notions of exchange, anthropologists will tell you, vary according to in different societies. What is an exchange is different in different societies. Modernity has transformed certain notions of exchange into standardized notions. So, currency as a means of exchange is a kind of standardization. There are so many parts in the world where it still does not work, and then it's oh, oh. But then, how will I know, what to, how to sell with how much, and so on. Yeah, and there, what we need to look at is how we have actually sold so many natural resources for a price which actually makes no sense. It's not capital. It's not something that you can exchange for anything. Natural resources, non-renewable resources, you may pay something for coal. Is that some payment? Because that coal took a very long time to make. So the price of coal, does it represent what the value of that coal is? And in some societies, such things cannot be bought and sold. Why? Because you recognize that there are some things in nature which are limited or too precious or whatever. See? So, what I'm trying to say is that notions of exchange, which are at the heart of all economic exchange, vary, and modernity and modern constructs, discourses on the market have flattened those uh, meanings. And it is for us, when we are talking about something like health, that we begin to recognize that flattening and to say that, okay, if we can still recover some things which are more useful, which are more sustainable, let's do that. And we should be very clear why we are doing it. We are not doing it to recover some hoary past. And we are not saying that, अरे पुष्पक विमान था हम लोग पहले भी प्लेन उड़ाते थे हम ये भी करते थे. That is not the reason. It is very clear why we are doing it. We are doing this because we have a political intent of sustainability. We are clear that modern notions of exchange have been unsustainable. We now can see that they are unsustainable. So, therefore, should we explore other notions of exchange, which are more sustainable, and recover them to a certain extent and see if we can work with them? After all, when there was no money and money was introduced for the first time, people would have thought, ये क्या तरीका है? पर उसके हम आदि हो गए, हम लोग अभ्यस्त हो गए ना. तो ये कोई कह नहीं सकता है कि अरे ये तो बहुत पुरानी बात होती थी, अब थोड़ी कोई मानेगा इसको. तभी मानेगा अगर सबका स्टेक दिखे उसमें. तो हर कोई हर चीज को मानने के लिए किसने सोचा था? अरे भाई, हम भी जब आपकी उम्र के थे तो हमने, कोई मुझे कहता कि कोई ऐसा चीज लेके चलोगी जिसमें जब मन चाहे बात किए, जब मन चाहे उसमें फोटो भी देखो, उसमें मैप भी देखो, आई वुड हैव बिलीव्ड यू इफ यू टोल्ड मी साइंस फिक्शन इज ओके. आई वुड हैव नेवर थॉट that I would possess something like this. Yeah. So, वो walkie talkie होता था, and that was only for policemen and for people generally providing security at any point. But or for that matter, I mean, this is a bit heavy because I have a battery cover on this. But the early cell phones that came, oh, exactly. The earlier cell phones was that big and heavy, and you couldn't carry them around. And if someone told me that it would be so small, I wouldn't believe them. So, human beings are extremely innovative and they come up with ideas which actually are a confluence of all the things that they feel that they have a stake. So if you feel you have a stake in communication and information, you will create something like that. And so on. So I'm saying that even therefore, the understanding of the market, society, relations, all of these things, there should be no hesitation to question why it is this way, especially if you can see that it creates problems. And then look for all alternatives that may have existed to see, acha, maybe people thought differently. And why? And did they benefit from that? So then can be reused in some way. But, sure. When did money come? I think it came at different points of time to different places. And to be honest, I would not know exactly, but I think as currency, see, at different points. So we've seen coins and all have emerged out of archaeological finds. So some kind of money existed in different civilizations at different points in time. So in Rome, you have coins, you have Kushan coins, you have Patliputra had coins. So that kind of money exchange existed always. But that was not the mode of exchange for everything in society. Some things were traded with money, most else was traded by exchange of goods. But exactly how the so it's a very complex story, and I don't know much of it. But whether it was less exploitative or not, that is a different question. And I would not. I don't think that it was necessarily less exploitative. I don't think it was less exploitative because money was not there. Because structures of exploitation and hierarchy have been part and parcel of societies always. But the arrangement of exchange were different, and the norms that governed exchange were different. So, for instance, when the Bakarwal would come and to the pastoral, any pastoralist community would come to the fields of the sedentary farmers, then the fact that they would uh, the goats would all come and stand on the field, they would feed on the stubble, and they would leave their droppings, and that was the idea of manuring the fields. And they would sell the milk and other products to the local communities. And they had norms on what they would sell it for and so on, and what you cannot sell. And one thing they could not do is buy and sell meat from them at all times. At certain times you could, at certain times you could not. And those norms were important. And interestingly, you find that all those norms are ecologically driven, not economically. And the idea of ecologically driving the exchange is that you do it in a sustained basis over a long period. It's not as if people did not buy goats for meat, they did, but there were norms about when they can be bought, when they cannot be bought, etc. So, what I'm saying is that exploitative they must have been, but then there were other categories as well. So, when we try to recover these norms of exchange, we would have to be very conscious of both. You can't simply say that I would like the ecological category and then forget that there was whatever elements of exploitation there were. वो भी deal करना पड़ेगा. And I would say that at this point in time, we've come through a whole process of political transformation where we are now keenly aware that any kind of exploitation should be opposed. So even when we recover these practices, we have to be very cognizant of the fact that we should not be recovering the exploitation that went with them. We have to find a way around it. Ah, it's a good question. See, it is a form of exchange, but it is not the market that we know today. In terms of a modern notion of a market where exchange is only direct. You give something, you get something in return. Time is also important. Here, if you're giving something 6 months later, you're giving it as a token of gratitude and thanks for what the healer has done, but you don't, but the healer does not expect. So, therefore, there is no uh, amount or attribute that you can specify what that family will give. Had it been had it been defined, then it would have been an exchange. Here it is what the anthropologists would call a tribute, actually. Yeah, tribute. So they would not. So there would be no expectation, and there would be nothing to define what they will give. Acha. The other thing is that healers were also, so you would say that, oh, so for 6 months, then would you be hungry? No, because the healers did not only heal, they did other things also. They were also primarily agriculturalists, most of them. So they did have land which they tilled and did other stuff also. And healing was something that they did very much, along with that. So there were other ways of compensating for what they were doing. And the other people who benefited from that healing, they found a way of reciprocating. It would be reciprocity, not exchange. Yeah. Yeah. Ah, interesting.
No, I just want it was a response that is it actually practically possible when you are as an autonomy, as in with with so much of interdependence, what kind of autonomy could one? I think it's a. As I'm saying, I'm also understanding there is some negotiation which is happening, and as a result, if I find myself autonomous in a particular situation, I am kind of agreeing to that and giving something for it and getting something in return. But how much of autonomy is really feasible when you have to when you are living in an interdependent kind of an arrangement? The market, state, society, each are independent on each other.
Ah, I mean, this is the part that huh? I was going to tie up with. Uh, I just realized how long I've been speaking. Uh, uh, what I've understood uh, in terms of the, sort of lowest rung of the political arrangement in society, um, is that it has both the a space which it defines for itself and the extent to which that space is necessarily interdependent with others. If that is indeed the case, then uh, how do we relate? And that's the question you're asking. That's the question in my mind. And I want to try and address it to whatever extent possible. That how do we see these three very important cornerstones: livelihood, natural resource management, and language. Uh, how is it? How does it operate? And what does it mean for people who live in particular at that particular level? If we look at most of the people that live at the lowest rung, uh, so whether those who live off the forest or of the land or of the water, natural resources, majority of people are actually expected to fend for themselves by natural resources still to a great extent. अभी तक लोग बहुत ज्यादा निर्भर उसी से अपनी जिंदगी बना फिर हमने क्या किया कि उसका कुछ हिस्सा जो है उसको बाजार में हमने खींच लिया उसको खींच लिया है उसका एक दाम बनाया फिर उनको कहा कि और बनाओ उसको और बढ़ाओ फिर उसके और तरीके क्या हो सकते हैं और फिर उसके अलावा फिर हमने और रिसोर्सेज और ये बनाए जैसे यूनिवर्सिटी बनाया जैसे अस्पताल बनाया etc. We made other instances. But the number of people that are dependent still on natural resources for their livelihood is still very, very high. The reality is that of interdependence. There is no question about it. We are all very happily drinking this charge, but the farmer who's raised the cattle that have given us the milk for the charge, I mean, we have no connect at all, and you and I are not capable of doing that. So interdependence in that way is acute. However, is it interdependence or is it dependence actually? We are dependent on them. To what extent are they dependent on? So when we are talking about interdependence, let's be very clear which way the wind is blowing. Who is interdependent on whom? Now you will say, of course he can produce, but unless he sells, how will he live? If you talk to many of these people, they'll say, we have enough to eat. In many parts, I'm saying I'm not everywhere. That's fine. Farmers are dying hungry, there's no question. But many places, people say we have enough to eat. We have enough fruit in our gardens, we have this thing. We have to eat. But for everything else, we have nothing. So what I'm trying to say is that the structure of interdependence, the way it has been articulated so far, is so deeply uneven. The articulation is uneven. I'm not saying the structure is uneven. Of course, the structure is uneven. But the way we've articulated it is he would not be alive because without us. Or would we be alive without them? That is never part of the discourse. So when we are talking about autonomy and we are talking about the political life, I think the whole process by which we are able to articulate structures of hierarchy, dependence, economy, etc. Those itself are so deeply flawed that we are, I think, making the arguments at all the wrong ends. That's why we don't understand what bottom up is. Because what the bottom is, we have articulated very, very unevenly, very unfairly, to my mind. Huh. Yeah, amazing. Amazing. Yeah.
This is a height of unevenness, and because for our benefit, like when I say our, for a section of people's benefit, we will promote breastfeeding, and for the same section of people's benefit, we will say that milk production from the animal should be sold out.
Actually, yeah, I mean, I was still exploring. See, the issue, I think, the way I've understood is that it requires enormous political confidence to be able to actually do bottom up planning. And we do not have an iota of that confidence. Sorry? What decentralization? Decentralization is decentral. You divide up the jobs at the top to filter down to the bottom. I think that we run democracies in which we are afraid to listen to the voice of the people. And we think that if we are going to listen to them, then there will be chaos. Everybody will have their own opinion and they will run away. I think, instead of studying Agamben, I would like to study processes of decision making prior to the colonial period. How people managed natural resources prior to colonialism. I am very, I mean, I really think that that's the one worthwhile thing that is worth studying. And look at agroecological conditions. Mohit, when you're saying that try to do, then you want to replicate. Why? Every agroecological condition context is different. Agroecological context will necessarily drive different kinds of decisions about how to understand the natural resource and how to use it, not abuse it. Uh, Very few environmental historians that have done some work, but which just shows that it needs to be done. But then and natural resources everywhere have been understood in terms of their use and norms for not abuse. So medicinal plants, I mean, since we're all health people, medicinal plants have always been used. And I'm just saying, I'm proposing two different kinds of models. One model was, this is not my proposition, this was a model in in existence for a long time. क्या था कि जहां पर जो है वहां का जो वनस्पति है उसके दौरान आप दवा बनाते हैं, ठीक है। तो आप दवा बनाते हैं, तो इसलिए हमारे देश में ये बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग आई थिंक एपिस्टेमोलॉजिकल फ्रेम है जो अभी तक हम लोग पूरी तरह से नहीं समझ पाते। Ayurveda, Unani, all these people, all these knowledge systems have broad epistemological principles. But when you try to apply those epistemological principles in different agroecological contexts, you find that there are variations. So when you want to deal with those variations, then you pick up different kinds of plants, then there's a notion of substitution, then there is notion of adaptation, but that requires enormous confidence, you know. इस सिद्धांत मैंने सीख लिया है। अब मुझे लगता है कि अप्रोक्सीमेशन इसका मेरे कॉन्टेक्स्ट में ऐसे ही होगा, बिकॉज थिंक अबाउट इट, हाउ कैन केरला आयुर्वेदा बी द सेम एज हिमाचल आयुर्वेदा, बी द सेम एज मध्य प्रदेश आयुर्वेदा? यू टेल मी, हाउ कैन इट? Agroecologically it makes no sense at all. So what did people do? The principle remains the same, the qualities remain the same, the idea with which you treat, diagnose, prognosis, everything is the same. But what is locally available, you have to have the confidence to study it, to understand it, and apply it to your patient the way you think. And we were not having like large scale malafide treatments. हो रहा था कुछ कुछ जो कि I think that we thought in a different frame. And then for that, you have to ask the question, what is the thinking for? If you're thinking about treating locally and making locally, that will give you one set of principles with which to manage your natural resources. If you're thinking of making, अच्छा डाबर ने इतना बना लिया तो मैं भी इतना बनाऊंगी, तो क्या होता है? Then you have to have centralized production. Then you have to have mining for medicinal plants. Then no norms about अरे इस टाइम ठीक नहीं है, इस टाइम नहीं करना चाहिए, इसको ऐसे नहीं ड्राई करना चाहिए, इसको वैसे करना चाहिए. All those norms are thrown out of the window because you are basically returns to scale कर रहे हैं. आप अपना scale build up कर. So the imperative that drives your decisions are completely different. When the imperatives are different, the norms, everything will be different. So you have to ask yourself, why are you doing this? So it's not about the bottom up being a principle which is so good by itself that we have to find ways of making it work, but that when you do bottom up and you do bottom up everywhere, then you have a greater chance of local advantage. And that local advantage, if it was very local, I mean, in terms of a small space, you can think of expanding it a little bit to see whether there's a scope for expanding it to a certain extent. But you don't think of making it a global company. So why you are doing it? Why you are doing bottom up? Is it an administrative virtue you're trying to implement? Or are you thinking that that's a more sensible economic ecology balance that we are trying to find? That is why you want to do it. Why do you want to do bottom up? Will govern what kind of bottom up you will have. No, of course, that's what I'm saying. That if you go there, that's an administrative intent. मैं जाके बॉटम अप करूंगी, अरे आप ऊपर से आ रहे हो तो बॉटम अप कैसे करें? कैसे होगा? नहीं है, फ्रॉड है वो तो. बट उसको फ्रॉड बोल के उसको क्रिटिक करने से फायदा नहीं है. वी हैव टू नो व्हाट डू वी वांट. दैट्स व्हाई आई एम सेइंग. तो जो भी वो आए तो आपको पूछना है कि चाहिए क्या. वो अच्छा करे या वी शुड लुक एज इफ वी आर डिसेंटेड. व्हाट इज इट दैट वी. That's why, and therefore, when I think we really begin to imbibe the understanding that there is so much diversity at the bottom that you can't think of scaling up and you can't think of replicating. इधर से उधर इतना फर्क है तो आप कैसे उसको स्केल अप कीजिएगा, उसको कैसे उसको रेप्लिकेट कीजिएगा? तो फिर आपको पूछना है कि काहे रेप्लिकेट करना है भाई? आपको सिद्धांत रेप्लिकेट करना है। दैट्स व्हाई आई थिंक दैट आयुर्वेद एंड ऑल आर फैसिनेटिंग। सिद्धांत हर जगह रेप्लिकेट हो रहा है, लेकिन उसका तरीका जो है वो लोकली उसमें इम्प्लीमेंट हो रहा है। आई थिंक दैट्स अ मच बेटर प्रिंसिपल। I think it's politically, administratively, it's a far superior principle. But that requires confidence. And that requires you not to have be in control of the situation all the time. For some people to be in control all the time. वो तो बहुत मुश्किल है। इलेक्शन पोस्टर है तो मेरा तो फेस उसमें छपना ही चाहिए। नॉट आई मीन इट्स द सेम थिंग। मेरा उसमें छाप जब तक नहीं होगा तो वो कैसे चलेगा? बट अगर सिद्धांत का छाप है और वो हर जगह पे करके लोगों को फायदा हो रहा है, दैट इजंट दैट अ बेटर अचीवमेंट? बट मेनी ऑफ अस डोंट अंडरस्टैंड।
Somebody is not confident that communities can take care of themselves.
No, no, that confidence comes from deep lack of understanding also. No? I mean, who are you to ascertain that the communities are confident, are capable of? Okay, that's right. But the state must not presume that it has the privilege of access of all knowledge. आई हैव द नॉलेज, पता नहीं उनको पता भी होगा या नहीं, पुअर थिंग्स। अरे उनको पूछो तो सही कि उनको क्या आता है। And then to be able to have the confidence to negotiate between what they know and what we know. Because what we know comes from one kind of context, what they know comes from another context. I'm not valorizing either. But I'm saying that is it possible for us to negotiate and say that the way you want to do this and the way we think it ought to be done, maybe, some kind of way can be found. And it's quite possible that they would say, your way is better. Or we say your way is better. But the problem is that politics ऐसे नहीं किया जाता है। इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि किया नहीं जा सकता है, अभी तक तो नहीं करते। जहां पर छोटे से पैमाने पे लोग करते भी हैं वहां पर अच्छे रिजल्ट्स। So bottom up means that you have to understand the bottom from itself, not for you to define what the bottom is. तो ये मेरा है, ये जो ब्लॉक है ये मेरा बॉटम और इसमें मुझे काम नहीं। That block is the you created that unit. They may not identify with it. तो वही मैं कह रही हूँ आपको, to incorporate all, where have we got this idea that all of them have to be incorporated into one plan framework? किस किस भगवान ने बोला है हमको, है ना? So I am saying that you have a policy framework which has certain principles. It must make sure that every child has a certain education. I mean, I have a problem with schooling also. I have a problem with setting up schools in every village also. Because the schools will mean a certain kind of curriculum that you and I have framed, and you and I may not know a single name of a tree in that place, but we think that we are superior educated. So I have a problem with that. But then what I'm saying is that the policy document does not have to be a series of solutions. It can be a series of principles in which it becomes clear that if the principle is being manifest in specific ways, and let those norms be very stringent. It must include this, it must have so many women, it must have so much representation, there should be no discrimination. You cannot say that if you belong to this caste, you can't do this, etc. I mean, we can put as many riders as possible, but they are at the level of the principle, saying that if these principles are followed, then we will think that the plan has been implemented. But the difficulty comes because we think that a plan is an idea that we think is good for everyone. That is, and so it's a foundational problem with the concept of what we think needs to be implemented. And what I would like to say is that those who made the Alma Ata Declaration, I mean, after all, they too came up with this kind of idea completely out of the blue. Not out of the blue, it had a history. But the idea that, the people have to be at the center, when it wasn't the case before that, translating that kind of democratic idea, then setting up primary health centers. After all these were also like really out of the box ideas. People took it, no? And after all this time, we are discussing it again and saying maybe we need to. And I'm saying that, at the level of the political principle of it, we need to challenge. The global south can challenge and say that, look, we live in a different world, as it were. So where our primary means something else. So therefore our approach will be different, our notion of health will be different. And don't ask us to give you standardized outcomes. We can give you standardized principles. It's like our patent regime, our intellectual property regime. For the longest time, we had patents on processes, not on products. I think that was a very interesting halfway between, the kind of regime they want to, the way they want to appropriate knowledge, and the way we felt an acknowledgement of knowledge. Yes. Oh my goodness.